Hit any buttons.
Good evening. Welcome back. Yeah. I'm Krista Wessel. I'm the evening host at All Classical Portland, and I'm doing my best to get the microphone as close to me as possible, but if I fail, I'm sorry, it's hard to remember how to talk into a microphone with a mask on, but I appreciate everybody doing their part in keeping us safe today. So I'll be chatting this evening prior to our concert with a member of our Oregon Symphony. I'm so excited to welcome the acting principal violist, Charles Noble. Yay! I'm always so excited when I get to chat with a member of the symphony because I feel like we get a chance to see some of the inner workings of the symphony and learn a little bit about some of the people that bring us these great performances. So Charles and I will chat a little bit about who he is. We'll talk a little bit about the program today. So let's start, Charles, with how long have you been with the symphony?
This is my 26th season.
Wow.
I don't know. I started when I was, three. Yeah, I remember a couple of years after I got here, I was talking to Peter Fajola, our associate concertmaster, and I said, "How long have you been here?" And he said, 25 years this year. And I was just thinking to myself, how can you just be in one place for 25 years? And now I know. You have a great orchestra in a great city with a great audience and great colleagues.
And I imagine it's felt like a different orchestra as you've gotten different music directors too, right?
Yeah, definitely very, very different. I like to say that I got successively better gigs by just staying in the same place. It was wonderful being here with James DePriest and who hired me, and such an amazing outsized personality, and as a published poet, he was a poet. That's the type of person he was. And then going from that legacy of having brought the orchestra, into basically full-time major orchestra status, and then moving on to Carlos Kalmar, who just, took from where Jimmy had brought us and just catapulted us ever higher in terms of the artistic quality and the adventuresome programming and, just the whole dynamic thing that Carlos does. And now we've got I can't believe I'm on my third music director, with David Dunsmeyer, who I'm super excited about so far in the little that we've gotten to work together so far.
We'll come back to conductors, I think, a little bit later. But first, you are a violist, which, for those who maybe aren't terribly familiar with instruments of the orchestra, looks like a slightly bigger violin. And the viola is the butt of many jokes. So how did you become a violist? Did you start on the violin? Did you start on the viola? What's your story?
Like many violists, I started on the violin. I started in 4th grade. I grew up in Puyallup, Washington, so I'm a Northwesterner, and started in the public schools in the string program, which they had a very well supported and organized string program there, which was really fantastic, and played violin all the way through high school, and then at some point in my first year of college, where I went to community college my first 2 years because I just didn't know what I was going to do. I was like, do I want to be an architect, or do I want to study international trade, or, oh yeah, I guess I could do music, but that was kind of far down the list. And I was doing a summer chamber music program through the community music school up in Tacoma, and somebody dropped out on viola, and they said, "We've heard that you've been messing around with the viola a little bit. Can you come in and play this Mozart flute quartet?" And so I did, and just kind of instantly fell in love with the instrument and knew that it was my true voice. And from then on, all the other stuff was out the window, and it was, how do I make this happen? So very much a late bloomer musically, and not really growing up with that intention like so many of the kids that you hear like on deck on All Classical that are kind of, they know what they have this laser focus and they know what they're going to do from quite an early age. And I was sort of just wandering around like, oh, I don't know what I want to do. And then all of a sudden, like a lightning bolt, it was like the viola.
And it became your career very suddenly, it seems like. So you were in community college at the time, then what was your educational path after that?
Yeah, so then I went to University of Puget Sound in Tacoma for my undergraduate, and then ended up in Philadelphia for part of a year and studied with the principal violist at the time of the Philadelphia Orchestra, Joe DiPasquale. And the situation with the school there didn't work out with my teacher. So I found myself without anywhere to go. And so then my previous teacher from Tacoma called up a friend of hers that was the orchestra director at University of Maryland and said, there's this great violist and he's kind of looking for a place to study. And so I went there for my master's and was part of a graduate string quartet that got to study with the Guarneri String Quartet, who was in residence at the school at that point, and also studied with Roberto Diaz, who at the time was principal of the National Symphony, then later became principal of the Philadelphia Orchestra, and now is president of the Curtis Institute of Music. So he's one of those jacks of all trades violists, you know. And then I went to Peabody to continue working with him for 2 years in Baltimore, and that brings me to a connection with our conductor tonight. And about a month before I graduated with my performance diploma, in May, I won my job here in May of 1995.
I mean, that really sounds like a shooting star. From the moment you discovered the viola to your first job, just sounds like a matter of a few years, really. Is that right?
Yeah, it was pretty quick. So I felt like, you know, I had a lot of catching up to do, and doing a lot in a very short time, and just trying to be as much of a musical sponge as I could be.
You mentioned our conductor tonight, David Zinman, spent a lot of time in Baltimore. You've played with David Zinman before?
I did. So he was music director of the Baltimore Symphony when I was both studying in Washington, D.C. area and when I was in Baltimore. And let's see, in 1988, actually this is before I got out there. So I was still an undergrad in 1988. And myself and two of my studio mates got into this brand new festival called the National Orchestral Institute that was held at the University of Maryland. So there's all sorts of these little through lines that kind of, if you're inclined to believe in something like Kismet or fate, you're like, oh yeah, I was headed for this thing. But so this festival was in University of Maryland. It was a summer festival, 3 weeks long, and there would be a different conductor each week. And so usually the kind of most impressive, biggest name was the third week conductor. And so that inaugural year, the big cheese of the conductors that worked with us was David Zinman. And I remember this last week before we started rehearsals, I was very apprehensive because back then, working with students, David Zinman he was mean. And he has been absolutely a joy to work with here and lovely, and there's no trace of that. But, you know, conductors get this kind of pedagogical thing where when they're working with students, they just really want to press home certain points. And, you know, maybe it's not the best, you know, bedside manner, but you certainly do remember those lessons when they're delivered, you know, with sort of an acid wit. But I remember he's a violinist. He was trained as a violinist as well as a conductor. I don't know if he plays piano, but one of the things I remember the most is we were doing Tchaikovsky Romeo and Juliet overture, And he wasn't happy with how something was going, the big tune was going, and he just like reached over and grabbed the concertmaster's violin and started, wailing on it. And it was really cool.
Oh my goodness. So you mentioned this is your 26th season with the Oregon Symphony. Being in this building, almost every day for 26 years, 26 seasons, I imagine the last year and a half was it was obviously quite an abrupt change for everybody. Can you walk us through what has kept you going, what has kept you playing, what has kept you a musician for the last 18 months when the Oregon Symphony was not in this building?
Yeah, it was one of those really bizarre situations where, it was so sudden. The night before, I and some of my colleagues had played a chamber music concert for what was to have been the first open music concert that Gabriel Kahane was putting together with the composer, singer, and violinist Caroline Shaw. And it was a tremendously difficult program, and we had worked our butts off. And, it came to the day, and we weren't sure, what's going to happen? How are we going to do this concert? And so what was decided was that it would be audio recorded, and nobody would be in the audience, and it would just be the musicians and Gabriel and Caroline. And so we did that, and it was fantastic, and we all went out after the show and went to a bar and shared snacks and had drinks together and went home, and that was the last time I played with other people in the same room for, I want to say not quite a year, but close to a year. So it was just super, super fast. Going from that to nothing. So I guess the first stretch was, well, okay, I've got nothing to do now. So, I put the instrument away and thought, well, I always sort of thought, wouldn't it be great to have some time free from the constant need to practice aside from because we do concerts every week and there's always new music, and I've got a lot of outside projects. So I've got a lot of stuff to work on all the time. And one of the things I had been hoping to do one day was, maybe take a sabbatical or something and work on stuff just that I wanted to work on at my own pace, not necessarily with the goal in mind, but just to not have, okay, here's what you're playing this week, do that, learn that. Okay, next week, do that, learn that. And so after I took that kind of initial break of, okay, I'm gonna just sit around on the sofa and feel sorry for myself for a period of time, then I just gradually thought, okay, I'm gonna pull out the Bach cello suites, which are very commonly played on the viola, and just go through them, start playing them, really taking them apart, without having that agenda of, I'm going to perform this in however many weeks. It was just, I'm going to play these because I love to play them, and I love the music, and I love playing my instrument, and I'm going to reconnect with all of that. So that's where that started. And then gradually, with my group that I play in and serve on the board of 45th Parallel Universe, one of our supporters and super fans works in coding, does IT and all sorts of stuff. And he came up, along with Ron Blessinger, one of the violinists in the symphony, thought, I think there might be a way for us to enable you guys to, as a quartet, to play together and hear each other at the same time as though you're playing in the same room. So we'd each be at home and play something together. So gradually that came to be, and then we started our series of 52 straight weeks of weekly live streams and streaming broadcasts of chamber music and solo music and stuff like that. So as things went on, and it became clear that, because the first couple weeks were like, oh, it'll just be another week. Oh, it'll just be a couple weeks, then we'll be back. And then it was clear that the pandemic was settled in, and it was going to be a while, that these projects started to take hold, and that was a lot of what kept me occupied. And I started a podcast and interviewed you for that, and just tried to have a wide variety of things on my plate at any one time.
So what was it like then to have the season begin, to have everybody back again, and not only everybody back, but a new music director, and Mahler's Second Symphony? Did any of you folks see Mahler's Second Symphony? Oh, God. What a cathartic experience, wasn't it? I watched it both streaming, and then I came back a couple of nights later and saw it live. I can only imagine how that felt for everybody on this stage. Can you tell me about your emotional reaction to that event?
It was kind of overwhelming. Just first of all, seeing my friends in person, a lot of the people in the orchestra. The orchestra is really a lot like a family. So seeing my friends and extended family in the orchestra, some of whom I had seen, we do hang out in the backyard and stuff like that. But, to see everyone all together in one place was out of this world. And then to just have the first, hear the tuning A ringing out through the hall and just, okay, we're back. I mean, it still sends chills up my spine to think about it. And then, to play this amazing, sprawling, huge, emotional piece, there couldn't have been anything better to have played to come back like that, because it's the Resurrection Symphony, and it really felt like the symphony had been, reborn out of the ashes of this pandemic.
Yeah, it sure did. One of the things that I noticed, having been here in the hall for that night of Mahler 2, is that while everybody was gone for those 18 months, behind the scenes, the crew was busy installing a new acoustic system in this hall, the Meyer Constellation system. I understand that's what it's called, and you'll see more in your program about that. I think there's a whole article about that in your program. It was intended to have everybody hear the music uniformly well, no matter where you're sitting in the house. It's not an amplification system. It's a very subtle tweaking of what is happening here so that everybody in the hall, no matter where you're sitting, gets the best possible sound. It's also intended to help you all hear each other better, too. And I wonder, to that end, if you could tell me a little bit about your experience with this new acoustic system.
Well, so far, we have relatively limited experience so far, but we spent 5 or 6 days in September with the Meyer sound technicians, and we tuned the hall, and we did just a ton of different repertoire and different configurations. They for one of the days, they built out the stage extension that they use for the Mahler, when we do the big Mahler symphonies, and had the orchestra set up for that. We did parts of Beethoven 9 with the choir and the soloists here, and then Haydn symphonies, just everything from small to as big as you can imagine. I would say at least 80% of the benefit of the system is for you in the audience, and I think that you'll find, especially as you were telling me, at the far edges, your listening experience is going to be much improved, and if you're under the balcony, it's also going to be much improved. I've heard from friends that have been at the concert so far, and they've been sitting in widely different areas of the hall, and they've all happily reported that they were very impressed and happy with the difference in the sound. Now, the other 20% is also super helpful, and it helps you too, is we've got, if you'll notice on the shell back here, there are these dark rectangles kind of at the top of the lower brown section, and there are speakers in there that help us to hear across the orchestra from front to back and side to side better too. So I know there were a few times where I was suddenly aware that I could hear the whole viola section behind me in the Mahler, which is 6 stands of people, so it's a big spread of people all the way back to the edge of the stage. And the only place that I had a similar feeling of being able to hear the section like that from the front, well, there were two places, at Carnegie Hall when we went there, and also at George Fox University, which has an auditorium that is quite wonderful. And so to be able to have that experience in the hall that we play in all the time is super. I mean, it's really great when the section can really hear itself in totality, because so often on stage before this, you could be playing along in an exposed passage where it's just you and the other people in the section, and you could really only kind of hear yourself and maybe a little bit of everyone else. And now you feel like you're part of the group much more. So that's makes for much better cohesion and confidence for us.
And it's not an amplification system. It's this it's like 300 microphones and speakers placed discreetly all throughout the auditorium. During the Mahler, I sat almost next to the wall up in the balcony, which before this would have been a subpar seat. But I could hear the inner voices like never. I could hear the violas. I could hear the second violins. I was so pleased. I think you're going to have a really great experience tonight enjoying this new acoustic system. Particularly because the program, my goodness, we've got like a monster of the piano repertoire, Tchaikovsky's first piano concerto with his phenomenal pianist, Simon Trubchevsky. And then a very, I think, underappreciated symphony by Sibelius, which I think I understand is a favorite of yours.
Yeah, going way back to basically just before I started playing the viola. My last year in youth orchestra, we played the Sibelius Third, and I fell in love with it then, and it's always been one of my favorite ones. And I was always surprised when I would talk to people about it, and I'd say, well, which Sibelius symphony do you like? And people would be like, okay, I really like number 2, because everybody likes number 2. And then probably be 5 and maybe 7, but like 1, 6, and 3 were sort of the kind of the little passed by ones. Kind of like Beethoven 4, 4th, and 8th tend to be a little neglected. And I think it shares a little bit with those Beethoven symphonies because it's very classical in terms of its orchestration. It's not a giant orchestra, and it's quite